Enterprise's Vulcan flashback retcons Star Trek history 22 years ago. Star Trek Enterprise retconned Vulcan history with a flashback episode set in 1957 Carbon Creek, Pennsylvania. Before Star Trek was added to the prequel's title, Enterprise Season 2, Episode 2, Carbon Creek, saw Subcommander T'Pol Jolene Blalock regale Captain Jonathan Archer, Scott Bakula, and Commander Trip Tucker, Connor Trenier, with the story of how her ancestor, Tamir, also Jolene Blalock, and two Vulcan explorers crashed in Pennsylvania and lived among humans undetected in the 1950s. While Archer and Trip take T'Pol's tale with a grain of salt, Enterprise strongly implies it's the truth. Star Trek Enterprise's Carbon Creek was produced 6 years after Star Trek First Contact, which was essentially Star Trek's origin story. Director Jonathan Frakes' hit movie depicted Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, and the USS Enterprise time traveling to 21st century Bozeman, Montana. While Picard battled the Borg on the Enterprise, Commander William Riker, Jonathan Frakes, and his away team ensured Dr. Zephram Cochrane's James Cromwell historic first warp flight aboard the Phoenix happened on April 5, 2063. Cochrane's feat led to first contact with the Vulcans, which changed the course of humanity toward exploring the stars. Star Trek Enterprise's Carbon Creek retcons when Vulcans came to Earth, according to T'Pol in Star Trek Enterprise's Carbon Creek. However, Vulcans actually first landed on Earth in 1957. A Vulcan survey team monitored the third rock from the sun because humans launched Sputnik, the first man-made satellite. Unfortunately, the Vulcans crashed just outside of Carbon Creek, Pennsylvania. While awaiting rescue, Tamir, Mestral J, Paul Bomer, and Strawn, Michael Croik, lived among the people of Carbon Creek, who were unaware that three pointy-eared aliens from the planet Vulcan were in their midst. Star Trek Enterprise's Carbon Creek also altered Earth's history in a few other ways. When the Vulcans were able to make contact with their people for rescue, Mestral opted to remain behind on Earth. Mestral had become fascinated by humans, and he decided to spend the remainder of his life traveling Earth to witness mankind's technological advancements. Tamir lied to her superiors and said Mestral died on Earth, so he never returned to Vulcan. In order to help a boy named Jack, Hank Harris, pay for college, Tamir also sold Velcro to a company in Pittsburgh. This retcons Velcro as a Vulcan invention that humans unwittingly purchased from aliens in Star Trek canon. Star Trek recognizes first contact with Vulcans a century after Enterprise in Star Trek. First Contact Day is formally established as taking place on April 5, 2063, 106 years after Vulcans crashed in Carbon Creek, Pennsylvania. April 5, 2063 is the day Zephram Cochrane completed his first warp flight on the Phoenix and met the Vulcans who landed on Earth to investigate, as seen in Star Trek First Contact. However, the Vulcans already knew about Tamir's experience living on Earth in 1957. T'Pol considers Carbon Creek the site of the true first contact between humans and Vulcans, and Carbon Creek's ending in Star Trek Enterprise indicates that T'Pol's version of history is, in fact, correct. According to T'Pol, the incident of Vulcans on Earth in 1958 is well documented at the Vulcan Science Directorate and Space Council. However, the Vulcans concealed the truth about Carbon Creek from their human allies. Regardless, First Contact Day is formally celebrated in Star Trek canon on April 5, 2063. It's an Earth holiday where children stay home from school, and Bozeman, Montana's first contact site, became a theme park, as seen in Star Trek Lower Decks. First Contact Day is also an annual event in the real world, and it is celebrated by Star Trek fans in Paramount, who use the occasion to deliver Star Trek news. The Star Trek universe has a long tradition of revisiting its history, using retcons to add layers of complexity and depth to its vast timeline. One of the most significant instances of this occurred 22 years ago, when Star Trek Enterprise redefined a core element of Star Trek lore, the Vulcans. Specifically, it was the portrayal of the Vulcan species, their relationship with humanity, and their role in shaping the United Federation of Planets that marked a bold reimagining and retcon of previously established history. Prior to Enterprise, the Vulcans were generally depicted as humanity's wise and benevolent allies, most famously through the character of Spock, a Vulcan-human hybrid in the original series. Spock embodied the quintessential Vulcan, logical, stoic, and fiercely devoted to the principles of reason and non-emotion. This image of Vulcans, established in the late 1960s, had become a foundational part of Star Trek's mythology. They were seen as guides, shepherding humanity into the galactic community with patience and wisdom, thanks to their own cultural devotion to logic, stemming from their famous spiritual leader, Surak. However, when Enterprise premiered in 2001, it introduced a radical shift in this depiction. Set in the 22nd century, Enterprise takes place about 100 years before the events of Star Trek, the original series, during the early days of space exploration and the founding of the Federation. The Vulcans we meet in Enterprise are quite different from the enlightened allies seen in other series. They are portrayed as secretive, condescending, and politically manipulative, often stymieing humanity's early steps into deep space. Rather than trusted friends, these Vulcans are sometimes antagonistic figures, a far cry from the nearly mythic benefactors fans had come to expect. The show's writers intentionally leaned into this shift to explore the early relationship between Earth and Vulcan, turning a smooth alliance into one fraught with tension. Characters like Ambassador Soval and Administrator Vlas embodied these darker elements of Vulcan society, casting their people in a more ambivalent light. Soval's disdain for human impulsiveness and Vlas's political machinations created a sense of friction that was vital to Enterprise's narrative. Even the show's central Vulcan character, T'Pol, often clashed with her human crewmates, reflecting the strained relationship between the two species. This depiction of the Vulcans offered an explanation for the coolness with which they regarded humanity. According to Enterprise, Vulcans had long doubted humanity's readiness for space exploration, and as a result, kept them under close watch, sometimes withholding critical technology and knowledge. In this view, Vulcans were gatekeepers, not partners, fearing that human emotional volatility would lead to disaster if unchecked. They were deeply skeptical of humans' ability to handle the pressures of interstellar diplomacy and military power. This reinterpretation of Vulcans not only retconned their role in Starfleet's early history, but also gave a deeper, more textured backstory to their own society. Vulcan was portrayed as a planet still grappling with the legacy of its violent past. While Surak's teachings had long dominated their culture, Enterprise revealed that not all Vulcans embraced his path of logic and emotional suppression. A secretive faction of Vulcans, known as the Sirenites, sought to bring a more authentic, pacifist interpretation of Surak's teachings to the forefront. The revelation that many Vulcan leaders had strayed from these ideals added a political and philosophical dimension to Vulcan society that had been largely unexplored. The most significant of these retcons came in the episode The Forge, where the crew of the Enterprise Annex-01 uncovers ancient Vulcan history. Captain Jonathan Archer discovers the Kirshar, a sacred Vulcan artifact containing Surak's original teachings. The Kirshara challenges the existing Vulcan leadership, exposing their corruption and hypocrisy. The recovery of this artifact becomes a catalyst for a Vulcan cultural reformation, which helps explain the more harmonious and logic-driven Vulcan society seen later in the Star Trek timeline. In effect, Enterprise positioned itself as the moment when the Vulcans truly began their journey towards becoming the logical, peace-seeking allies of humanity that fans had always known. The retcon was a bold move, but it ultimately enriched Star Trek's depiction of Vulcan society. It added layers of complexity, showing that Vulcans, too, had their struggles and flaws. This darker portrayal gave way to an eventual redemption, tying into the larger theme of Star Trek,